Trinity test. Over 50 years have passed since the first atomic bomb test, codenamed Trinity, lit up the skies over the dark New Mexican desert and brought the world into the atomic age.
Well, Los Alamos was in charge of designing and developing and building atomic bomb for the Second World War. They had two designs, one using uranium, one using plutonium. They decided they needed to test the plutonium design, so they looked around the western part of the United States for a test place. They finally decided on the north end of the old Alamogordo bombing range, which was created in the Second World War.
Only one atomic bomb has been tested here in the deserts of Alamogordo. Since 1945, its significance has affected every person on this planet. Each year, tourists from around the world visit the Trinity site to learn about the history and evolution of nuclear testing, right at Ground Zero. Located 2 miles from Ground Zero is the McDonald Ranch House. It was here that the plutonium core for the Trinity device was assembled.
Then they can walk down to Ground Zero, and we'll see a lava-type obelisk at Ground Zero, and it marks exact Ground Zero. It's sitting between what would have been the 4 legs to the 100-foot steel tower in which the bomb was placed. At the west end of the fenced-in area is a shelter building, and that's protecting an original portion of the crater floor. In other words, underneath a foot of sand inside that building, there is a sheet of trinitite glass, green glass in there. In 1984, we paid to have the McDonald House restored, and we started offering that as a part of the tour. And the visitation leapt upward dramatically. Now we're averaging probably between 2,000 and 3,000 visitors each time. Most people are visiting because it is a very historic spot. I mean, they've been told that for the last 50 years. But where else can you walk where an atomic bomb was exploded in this country?
People don't realize that we did nuclear tests in Alaska, Colorado, New Mexico, and Mississippi.
On August 6, 1945, Hiroshima, Japan was devastated by an atomic bomb that exploded in the sky over the city. Today, Hiroshima has risen from the ashes and is now the biggest city on the western end of Honshu, Japan's largest island. Located near Ground Zero is the Hiroshima Memorial Peace Park. Opened in 1955, the Hiroshima Peace Museum now preserves many of the artifacts of the destructive force of the atomic bomb. The Children's Peace Monument is dedicated to the memory of Sadako, a little girl who succumbed to the effects of the atomic bomb. On the anniversary of the bombing, children from around Japan fold thousands of paper cranes in her memory and leave them at the monument as a wish for good health and world peace. As we approach Ground Zero, we find the ruins of the Hiroshima Industry Promotion Hall, now simply known as the Atomic Bomb Dome. It It was 1,850 feet above this building in 1945 that the little boy bomb exploded with a force of 12 kilotons, leveling almost all buildings within 2 kilometers. The atomic bomb dome stands testament to the consequences of nuclear weapons and a symbol for world peace.
"18 years ago, the event of nuclear weapons changed the course of the world. Since that time, all mankind has been struggling to escape from the darkening prospect of mass destruction on Earth. Yesterday, a shaft of light cut into the darkness. Negotiations were concluded in Moscow on a treaty to ban all nuclear tests in the atmosphere, in outer space, and underwater. For the first time, an agreement has been reached on bringing the forces of nuclear destruction under international control. This limited treaty will radically reduce the nuclear testing which would otherwise be conducted on both sides. And it offers to all the world a welcome sign of hope. It will include specific proposals for fair and enforceable agreements to halt the production of nuclear weapons, to convert them from weapon stockpiles to peaceable use.
Excavations of new harbors, big dams, canals, passes through rugged mountainous terrain. These and other massive, imaginative, earth-moving projects may soon be ours. Created in seconds with the tremendous energy of the peaceful atom. Nuclear explosives for large projects that are simply not feasible with conventional methods and at considerably less expense. Scientists and engineers today are carefully working toward these goals with a series of nuclear excavation experiments designed to increase their knowledge and skills in this exciting new concept. They call their program Plowshare. It is a deliberate, careful, scientific program. Cratering and excavation through the use of nuclear explosives. The peaceful atom, a tool to move a mountain.
Late 50s time frame, people, particularly at this laboratory, started looking for other, perhaps more constructive uses to which they could put the tremendous energies involved in nuclear detonations. And they began to explore various things that could be done with them. Excavation, production of heavy isotopes, production of underground cavities for terminal gas storage, oil well and natural gas well stimulation, various things to which these huge forces could be put to use that would be of a benefit to the human race in general.
In the southeast corner of New Mexico, we arrive at Carlsbad Caverns, one of the deepest, largest, and most ornate caverns in the world. Carlsbad Caverns began forming more than 20 million years ago, when the land uplifted and water seeped into limestone cracks, gradually enlarging them to form a honeycomb of chambers. To the east lies another large cave. This one, however, was created in a fraction of a second. 35 miles southeast of Carlsbad is the site of the first nuclear detonation in the Plowshare program, codenamed Project Gnome.
Gnome was a very large test in the sense that there were many, many goals sought on the test. They were looking at the production of heavy isotopes in quantities much larger than could be economically produced in a laboratory environment. Power generation, the idea that the heat generated by the detonation could be used by pumping water into the cavity while it was still hot, generating steam, and then bringing the steam off to generate electricity. Seismic studies, how does the geology surrounding a nuclear detonation behave?
Emplaced 1,184 feet underground, the energy from the Gnome blast will instantly vaporize 100 tons of bedded rock salt at the point of detonation.
Unfortunately, Gnome had some problems very shortly after detonation. Cracks along the border of a clay seam allowed much of the energy to escape into the drift tunnel, and that tended to trash up a lot of their experimental equipment, and it did in fact release some gaseous material to the atmosphere. Delayed re-entry proceedings for about 6 days.
Six months after the detonation, exploratory crews re-enter the blast area. The explosion created a huge underground cavern where one could find stalactites of melted salt. Intense radiation from the explosion colored the salt vibrant shades of blue, green, and violet. At the end of the tunnel is subsurface ground zero, a cavity measuring 170 feet across and 90 feet high. Today, only a weathered plaque gives testimony that a nuclear explosion took place beneath the visitors' feet. Four Corners area of northern New Mexico and southern Colorado is an area of intense industrialization and natural gas production. It is here that the Atomic Energy Commission conducted 3 nuclear detonations. Beginning in the winter of 1967, a 29-kiloton nuclear device known as gas buggy was detonated in this area.
Gas buggy was one of several gas stimulation experiments the Plowshare program performed. There were 3 events, gas buggy, Rulison, and Rio Blanco. Geologists were aware of the presence of natural gas in very tight geologic formations. It couldn't be accessed or extracted economically with conventional methods. So the idea was put forth that we'll sink a shaft into this formation, we'll lower a nuclear device and detonate it and use that power to fracture the gas-bearing rock, allowing an increased flow back into the chimney area, the shaft area, and we can then pipe the natural gas off. primary differences between the three of them was refining the design of the devices that were used for that. The idea being that you wanted the explosive force in large quantity, but you wanted to reduce the amount of radioactive debris that was left over to the greatest extent possible.
And that worked to some degree. However, the gas apparently was so radioactive it couldn't be distributed commercially. And Gas Buggy now has a little sign, a very pastoral setting actually. It's really quite beautiful. Nice sort of glen in the woods in the Carson National Forest. You'd never know what had transpired there.
This is Fallon, Nevada, a small town on U.S. Highway 50, not far from Reno. In 1961, a site near Fallon was surveyed for an important scientific experiment, an underground nuclear explosion in an area of frequent earthquakes. The town is just west of such an area.
Well, perhaps we all were a little concerned about the shot when we first heard about it, thinking perhaps it might trigger off an earthquake. However, by the time the day of the shot, well, people were going about their business unconcerned.
Well, I was a little concerned about that big shot triggering an earthquake here, but I was out there in the field and I looked right over that way when the explosion took place, and I didn't see any dust or didn't even feel a quiver of any kind.
Well, I was in the house and I didn't feel anything either.
Few communities have had the experience which Fallon residents had. Project Shoal was only the third nuclear experiment ever conducted in the country outside of a Nevada test site. Most citizens of Fallon took the detonation in stride. They learned that the Atomic Energy Commission takes all reasonable precautions to ensure the safety of the public, and that official predictions of the effects of a nuclear explosion were borne out by the facts.
The Vela uniform tests in general, as a concept, were designed to determine how a country might conduct a clandestine nuclear test, and whether or not the tools that were available at the time to the scientists and engineers were up to the task of detecting such a test and distinguishing between a nuclear event and an earthquake.
7 tests were conducted under the Vela uniform series, including the only 2 atomic bombs to be detonated east of the Mississippi. A huge underground salt dome, located 21 miles southwest of Hattiesburg, Mississippi, was the home of 2 nuclear detonations named Salmon and Sterling.
I was living in Jacksonville, Florida at the time. Of course, I was monitoring this since this is my old home area right here. A lot of my people lived here at the time. A lot of my friends still live here. At this particular site in the 60s and 70s, the Atomic Energy Commission did some underground nuclear testing.
Salmon was the first of 2 tests conducted at the same site in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, as part of the Vela uniform program. Significant measurements were taken in the seismic area to determine what kind of signals were generated by an underground test. Sterling, the second event conducted at the same location, was detonated inside the cavity generated by the Salmon event. They were looking at the issue of decoupling. The idea behind decoupling was that you would detonate the device either in an excavated cavity or one generated by a previous test to determine if that cavity would alter the signal, the seismic signal in some fashion.
That was during the time when we were trying to verify with the Russians that we would stay within the limits of the test ban, that the test would be less than 150 kilotons.
A television camera was lowered over 2,700 feet below the Mississippi landscape to record the effects of the nuclear detonation. The camera reveals an almost perfect sphere formed deep in the salt dome. 3.5 months after the test, the temperature inside the cavity is still almost 400 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to burn the paint off the surface of the camera.
They said it seemed like the end of the world was coming. It looked like a wave in the ocean coming toward them. The citizens that lived around here, plus some of the technicians on site, tell me they were overwhelmed at the size of the blast. It was humongous. It was a whopper.
The ever-increasing power of nuclear tests in the 60s were beginning to take their toll on the skyscrapers of Las Vegas. A search was undertaken for a new location for high-yield underground tests. 100 miles north of Las Vegas, near Tonopah, Nevada, was the site of a nuclear detonation approaching 1 megaton in yield, codenamed Faultless.
I pretty much fell into this interest by accident. I had an interest in prehistoric archaeology and was talking to a friend about some archaeological sites near Moores Station in central Nevada. He remarked offhandedly that there had been a nuclear test near there. They selected a site in the Hot Creek Valley near Moores Station and did the first test, Faultless, as a seismic calibration. The idea was to set off a shot of approximately 1 megaton in yield to determine if that area could withstand higher yield shots up to 5 megatons.
Faultless was aptly named because it led to a large degree of faulting, which is visible all around the region. You can see that basically the ground just kind of collapsed, not like a subsidence crater, but along natural fissures that had been enlarged by the nuclear test.
The site, originally planned to host a 5 megaton detonation of a Spartan missile, was rescheduled for Alaska. Alaska and the islands which make up the Aleutian chain are part of an area of the Pacific Rim dotted with volcanoes and rocked by earthquakes. Established in 1913 as a wildlife refuge, Amchitka Island, in the westernmost area of the Aleutian chain, was the site of 3 nuclear detonations. Conducted between 1965 and 1971, the tests were codenamed Longshot, Milrow, and at 5 megatons, the largest underground test was Cannikin.
Cannikin was a test of the Spartan ABM warhead. It was conducted on Amchitka Island in the Aleutian chain up in Alaska. That site was selected primarily for its remoteness. Cannikin was to have been one of the largest underground nuclear tests ever detonated. It was judged to be far too large to conduct at the Nevada test site.
The one that really coupled into the ground for me was Cannikin up on Amchitka. That rocked and rolled quite a bit. Cannikin was probably one of the longest extended periods of construction we've had on any of the shots. It was approaching 2 years to drill this hole. The hole was drilled at 90 inches in diameter, 5,000 feet deep, and then it was cased with 54-inch steel casing. The thickness of the casing was about 1.5 inches, which is a pretty hefty hunk of steel. We ran these guys down to 5,000 feet, and with torches, they cut holes in the casing and were able to then go out into the rock and gradually mine out a 100-foot diameter sphere in the rock down there. Now, you must remember, it's freezing, snowing up on the surface on Amchitka Island. Amchitka is not a very hospitable climate. Down at the bottom, the temperature was 105 degrees, and it was raining. The water was just coming out of the rock, and the water was 105 degrees. Down there, when you were mining, the only air you had was compressed air run down pipes alongside the casing, and you know how much noise compressed air makes. And the light was just a headlamp on your hard hat. So trying to talk in that environment in this spherical cavity with all this compressed air, and it's raining, and all you can see is what your little hard hat, and you really couldn't talk to anyone. It was just almost impossible.
Seismic recordings of the test registered a magnitude of 6.8 on the Richter scale as a direct result of the detonation. Over 1,000 aftershocks with magnitudes as great as 4.0 on the Richter scale were recorded within the first 30 days following the blast. The energy produced by the detonation caused the surface of the island directly above the device to rise 25 feet. Large portions of the coastline collapsed into the sea for a stretch of 2 miles from ground zero. The beach and ocean floor in the near vicinity of the Canakin site were permanently raised 5 feet. The detonation of this weapon was the main motivating factor in the creation of the Greenpeace organization.
In Las Vegas, it's just another bright and gaudy night. But the skies are clear, the wind is down, and tomorrow, only 80 miles away, is D-Day.
Traveling 65 miles northwest of Las Vegas on US Highway 95, we arrive at the Nevada test site. Established in 1951, the Nevada test site stands above all other nuclear sites as the most bombed location on Earth.
The test site was picked in 1951 out of 3 other sites here. Reason that the scientists came here is that they were looking for a place to do on-continent nuclear weapons tests. At the time, they were doing all the nuclear weapons tests on the Pacific. It was very expensive. President Truman wanted to see if they could find a location in the United States to do the smaller, lower-yield nuclear tests on continent, and they ended up with the Nevada test site. At the time, it was called the Nevada Proving Grounds. When we bring people through Mercury, which is the base camp of operations for all the activities out here at the Nevada test site, they come through a small pass. The first thing that visitors see when they come to the test site is the Frenchman Dry Lake bed. That's where the first atmospheric tests were conducted out here on the test site. The first test was conducted on January 27, 1951. 14 total tests were conducted out there on Frenchman Flat. And what people see when they go out to Frenchman Flat is the historic structures that remain from those atmospheric days. There's the hotel, motel walls. What the scientists were doing with those is they built the faces of those out of different types of materials, brick, mortar, concrete block. And they wanted to see what the pressures from the blast would do to those walls, what would stand up, what wouldn't stand up. You also see an old railroad bridge that is sitting out there. It's pretty remarkable because it's one of the things that really gives you a good idea what the heat and blast effects. You've got these very thick I-beams that have been bent almost like spaghetti. There's some concrete domes What we know about the principles of hardening of concrete were developed out there on Frenchman Flat at the test site. The scientists used different types of mixtures of concrete, of mortar, mixed with rebar, different sizes of rebar, so they could understand how to harden concrete. One of the more unusual things that's also out there on Frenchman Flat is the old bank vault. The standards that U.S. bank vaults are built today are built based on the tests that they did out there at the site. And you can see where the sides have been peeled away from the blast, but the contents that were inside that vault at the time of the blast survived all of that. So what they were looking at is construction of items, how they would withstand the heat and blast. They weren't looking at the effects of the radiation, but how things would hold up to the heat and blast. And so a lot of modern day standards that we have for structures that we have now, bank vaults, for a multitude of things, have come about as a result of the atmospheric testing that took place there on Frenchman Flat during the atmospheric testing days. Ice cap was to be the last underground nuclear test that was going to be conducted here on the test site before the moratorium was signed in 1992. But events of the world caught up with us here, and that test was never conducted. As a result, the divider test in September of 1992 ended up being the last underground test that was conducted. So what you have at Ice Cap is the tower, and inside that tower is the canister that would have held the nuclear device. An 1,800-foot hole is there, all the cables are on the ground, and some of the support trailers are still sitting there. Those support trailers is where all the information would have come up the cables and would have been recorded. And as well, as a part of redundancy, those signals would have been sent here to the control point and recorded in the control point. This is the control point at the Nevada test site. The control point is where everything happens on the day of an experiment. All the scientists, the technician, the security people, anybody that's associated with the experiment are here in the control point. This is where all the information comes into to tell the scientist if the experiment has been successful. In essence, it becomes the nerve center for the test site on the day of an experiment. Sedan crater was done in 1962, July of 1962. It was part of the Plowshare program. What they were trying to see is if you could take a very large device, in this case it was 104 kilotons, and use it to dig a canal, a lake, if you could blast away mountains to make a pass for a highway system. They wanted to see if you could use a nuclear device to dig with. The answer to the question is yes, but this nation never did it because of the residual radiation that's left behind. But what you've got with Sedan crater is a big hole in the ground that's 1,800 feet across and about 300 feet deep, and it shows you the force that you can have from a 104 kiloton nuclear device. The Apple II houses, that was a test that was done in 1955. It was a civil defense effects test. The civil defense agency of the time that was here in the United States wanted to see how modern Americana would withhold or withstand a nuclear attack on the United States. If you remember, a lot of people may have read the history and seen, and for those that were alive during the time, the mentality was duck and cover, a red under every bed. And so it was on the top of everybody's mind about safety from nuclear weapons. So what the Civil Defense Agency of the time did was create American homes, wood structures, brick structures, two-story homes with basements. And they outfitted these homes with everything that you would find in a modern 1955 home. They put mannequins inside, they put food, they put cars, they put radios that were working. Everything in the house was fully operational that you would find of the time. Then after the test, they came in to see what the effects were on that American home. So that gave the scientist an idea of the effect that was going to happen. The closer you were to the ground zero from the blast, you could see certain type of damage, and then the farther out you would see what the damage effects would be. So this allowed them to do the type of modeling that they did back in 1955 so that they, as a civil defense agency, could prepare some type of plans that the American citizens could use. Testing out here has been done in a variety of ways. They would fly the airplanes out of a Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque and drop the devices out of an airplane. They suspended devices from balloons. They put them on top of wooden towers. They put them on top of steel towers. They shot one out of a cannon. That was through the 1950s. Then with the Limited Test Ban Treaty, we went to underground testing, and tests were done anywhere from 600 feet to 2,000 feet underground. In all, the United States has done 1,054 nuclear weapons tests, and of that, 928 of those were done here at the Nevada test sites. To come out here, it's as simple as just providing us with some very basic information. We'll bring you out here in a bus, and we'll tour you the 200 miles that you'll drive in a day, seeing the sites of this piece of property that's larger than the state of Rhode Island.
Just about every continent has at least one nuclear test site. There's about 2,400 nuclear bombs that have been detonated across the globe. The United States has done roughly half of that. It's sort of surprising. We actually did underground nuclear tests in what are now cow pastures and forests and national recreation areas. The test sites, they need to be preserved in order for us to remember. You can visit these sites. Most of the radiation was contained underground in most of the tests. There's a real strong connection you can feel to the nuclear program. You make a personal connection to a nuclear test. People can go visit engineering achievements in a place where you wouldn't expect a nuclear bomb to have been detonated.